Good morning and welcome to today's live talk, where hopefully we're going to help clear up some of the confusion around renting in the current lockdown situation. The reason why we put this webinar together for you today is that we wanted to help you with your worries. We wanted to address some common questions like, can I move? But really, should I move? We also wanted to look at legislation. So we wanted to unpick some of the technicalities that might have changed when it comes to your rights as a tenant in lockdown. But lastly, we wanted to have a look around your concerns about affordability. Now, there's a lot there. So to do this, we have had to enlist some help. But luckily, Rightmove have handpicked a panel of experts, which each have a different position in the rental world. Before I introduce you to our three experts to answer some of your questions, I wanted to offer just a small disclaimer. Everything that's happening to us is completely new. We're all doing our best to navigate this as circumstances developed. So none of this has happened before. In everything that we discussed today, it's important to remember that the number one priority for us all should be our health, safety, and well-being. That means adhering to the latest advice from government and the NHS should override any advice you hear from me, our panelists, or anyone else for that matter. As things are developing so quickly, we all need to stay up to date, and we need to make sure that we're following the latest advice from the government. Anything that's relevant to you might be relevant today, but it might not be relevant in a week's time. So do stay up to date if you can. With that, it's time to introduce our guests. We have three specialists today who we hope can help you with your questions. Our first guest is Daniel Barea. Now, Daniel is a data analyst for Rightmove. The reason why Dan is here is because of Rightmove's popularity. Rightmove's popularity puts Dan in an extremely unique position. He gets to see how many things, including the coronavirus, affect the rental market as a whole. He gets insights into trends and the movements of the property market, and of course, he gets insight into some of the new technology that is around to help you. Our second guest is David Cox. Now, David is CEO of Arla Property Mark. For those of you that aren't familiar with the acronym, it is the Association of Residential Letting Agents. They are the leading regulatory body within the lettings industry. They work to improve standards and protect consumers. That's you, the tenant. So David is a key figure within the lettings industry and will be helping us make sense of the guidance issued by the government to tenants. So Daniel's going to look at everything from a market point of view, and David's going to have a really strong influence on the legislation point of view. But finally, we have Tom. Now, Tom Kite is partner of Comfort Lettings. Comfort is an established letting agency based in Nottingham. They focus on creating a better letting experience for landlords and for tenants. Tom himself is a qualified Arla member and focuses on creating a customer experience that simplifies the Housing Act for those of you in the real world, for tenants who don't understand necessarily all the jargon that goes around with it. So with all that said, I think it's time to put some faces to some names. It's time to test out the tech, switch on those cameras and say hello to Daniel, David and Tom. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? That is
Hi.
everyone.
Good afternoon, hello.
Perfect. So Daniel, David, Tom, thank you very much for taking some time out to join me today in what are truly strange and concerning times for everyone. I'm sure you'll know that today we've got 45 minutes to talk and we've got a hell of a lot to get through. We have had hundreds of questions come in. We've tried to bunch them into categories so we can get as much value out of the small amount of questions that we will actually be able to ask. With that, there are thousands of individual circumstances to consider, and the advice that we give might differ from one person to another because of this. But broadly speaking, we've established three groups for you all. We can look at pre-tenancy, so before you move in and before you become a tenant. So we're looking at things like the market, what will happen in the market, can I move, should I move, things like that. Then we've got mid-tenancy, so when you are a tenant, what are your rights and what might have changed during this period of uncertainty. And then we're going to look at new and end of tenancy. So these are going to be things like contracts, deposits, move dates and services. So if that's all okay with everyone, I'm going to kick off at the beginning of the journey. So Dan, that means you. I'm going to look at the start of the journey for everyone who would be looking to move and looking for their new home. So Dan, at the moment, is anyone even looking for a rental property right now? Are lettings agents keeping their stock on the market?
Well, I got the answer to both of those is yes. So firstly, are people looking? Well, surprisingly, in spite of everything that's happening, um, although activity has slowed down considerably because of the circumstances, this is 100% to be expected. But in spite of everything, people are still going ahead with their searches on Rightmove. We're still seeing millions of searches happening and thousands of inquiries being sent through to lettings agents. Now, we spoke about this in a previous webinar, right? About how the market is, generally speaking, like roughly comprised into two groups: the ones who will move or are looking to move when the circumstances are right, when they can. But there's always going to be a group of home movers who are in the must move group, the ones who have little choice, who absolutely have to, because of family circumstances or job relocations, sometimes the birth of a child, or any number of circumstances which basically force them to have to move. And I guess these are those people who primarily are right now on Rightmove looking for properties and who are actually sending through inquiries. Secondly, the second part of your question was, are agents still keeping their stock, their properties on Rightmove? Well, yes, they are for the most part. The government hasn't advised, from what we understand, agents or landlords to remove their properties from the market. So a quick look at the average number of rental properties available on Rightmove. This was in March. When we compare it, when we look at the stock available on Rightmove before the lockdown, and then today after the lockdown, there's a difference of about 4%. So it's not hugely significant. The biggest drop in activity has been in new properties coming to market, and we can talk about that later. Now, I guess another big question here is that although we can ask, is there still stock? But for every tenant who sends an inquiry through about a rental property, on the other side of that is a lettings agent. And lettings agents right now are faced with their own challenges and are having to figure things out themselves. And I think that's a really good thing that Tom is here today, because I'm sure he'll be able to explain some of the stuff that he is still able to do for his tenants and landlords. I know agents are being very creative in finding ways to help their customers. So I guess what happens after an inquiry is sent through would probably be something that Tom or David would be able to give more clarification on.
And that's a good point. So David, I'm going to pick this up with you in just a second about whether people kind of should be looking to move at the moment. But just while we're talking about how agents are dealing with inquiries, Tom, nice to meet you, and thank you for joining us today. So how are you dealing with incoming inquiries at the moment, and how are you dealing with viewings that are coming through to you?
So I suppose first up, viewings, in-person contact. We've stopped absolutely in order to follow government guidance, and so those generally, probably most people will find, are not happening in any form. But what we are doing is the sort of virtual appointments, and we've got video tours that we're able to distribute and show people. So we would send out a video tour. We'll allow people to watch this, and then we do a series of sort of follow-up conversations with applicants and tenants at that point, hopefully to cover off the sorts of questions that they might otherwise reasonably ask at a viewing appointment and things like that. So yeah, the agents are trying to find different ways of doing that, and I think there probably will be quite a varied mix and set of results depending on area and depending on which agents you speak to, as to what provision they put in place before, and their ability to be able to sort of cope with the sort of online life, as it were. Certainly some agents are almost shutting up shop a little bit, but I know the vast majority are maintaining some sort of virtual presence and are trying to assist people through that way.
Okay, perfect. So it looks like the ability is still there. People still can find properties, they still can send inquiries on properties, they can still go and they can do virtual viewings, so that the world kind of still ticks over. But David, it brings me to kind of the point which is really poignant at the moment, is just because you can, should you move right now? The government have issued quite clear instructions to stay at home. There is terminology around a critical move, and critical moves are possible. But can you offer your view on kind of whether people should be moving, and maybe a bit of clarification about what critical might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sorry, Jason, the term's actually essential moves.
Okay.
And that's what it says in the government guidance. So should anybody be a little bit bored at home, the government has issued quite comprehensive guidance to landlords and tenants. It's a 21-page document that does say very clearly, unless it is essential, you shouldn't be moving house. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean stop, cancel everything. So if you are partway through, maybe you were planning on moving a couple of weeks ago, but because we've gone into lockdown, you haven't. The recommendation is to hit pause, not cancel, because you're in house B, you want to move into house C. The people that are already living in house C want to move on to house D, and there's going to be people in house A that want to move into your house, house B. So don't cancel that chain. We're just press pause. And then once we're out of lockdown, just continue. I'm fairly sure there is going to be a huge amount of activity in the lettings market very shortly after we come out of lockdown. But for the time being, you should only be moving if it is absolutely essential. Now, that is as close to the government saying don't move as a government can get. They can't say absolutely don't move, because as Dan's already noted, there are certain situations. But what they mean is if there is risk to life or limb, don't move. So if your roof has caved in, if you haven't got any hot water, and effectively the property is uninhabitable, burst pipes. The other example is domestic violence as well. If there is a situation at home, do get out of that situation. But it really has to be an issue of life or limb to move, rather go on the right move, speak to your agent, get everything sorted for when we are out of lockdown. You can even go as far as signing all the contracts, just putting the move-in date to be confirmed post-lockdown. You can get everything sorted so that the moment the government release the restrictions, off you go to your new property. But for the time being, our advice, which is entirely in tune with the government's advice, is stay put in the house that you are living in at the moment, continue paying rent on that house. Even if you've already signed a contract to a new house and it technically should have started, keep paying rent on the current property you're living in, and then when you can move, do move and start paying rent on your new property.
Perfect. And Tom, are you seeing many of these essential moves in your market, in your area? Or is it a really small percentage of activity at the moment, or is it affecting a bigger number than we think?
I think generally speaking, it's a fairly limited number of people who fall into that category requiring essential moves. I think it's absolutely right what David said. Though, if you're in a position where you do need to move, but potentially you don't fall into that category of an essential move, there is still you can still do almost in fact, you can do everything now that you would be able to do, save the actual move-in part. And the other thing that's happened is as a result of a change of legislation to the right to rent checks, that can now be done virtually by agents as well, whereas previously that would have required an in-person appointment for an agent to see your physical documentation, and as a relaxing of that particular rule as a consequence of the situation that we're currently in, agents are able to now do this entire process online. So they can do the viewing, they can do a tenancy interview, they can do previous landlord checks and tenancy reference checks. They can do document preparation and drafting and signing, all prior to the point of moving a tenant in. So so certainly there is still things that renters can do. There is progression that can be made for a period of time in the future where we're given some more certainty about, you know, the relaxing of the restrictions about movement of people and things.
It's amazing how quickly we've all adapted and changes have come in to get that far into the process. Looking back 6 months ago, do you think you'd be able to? I mean, we wouldn't be able to do that, get that far remotely, would we?
I mean, yeah, it's the big one, as I say, the change of restriction to the right to rent has meant that entire process now can be virtually fulfilled, and that means that that renters shouldn't be sort of put off from considering, you know, the next steps where that's sensible.
Thank you. Dan, I'm just going to point it back to you when we're looking at the market before we get into kind of the mid-tenancy questions that we've been sent through. Looking at kind of the market activity and the fact that if things have kind of slowed down, obviously, to a certain degree, do you expect to see lots of new stock coming on when all this blows over?
So in the same way that a lot of tenants are having to maybe hit pause on their plans to move, there are also a lot of people who were about to bring their, or were just at the early stages of bringing their property to market, and then when all of this happened, they just had to either withdraw or pause again on their plans. So the most probable scenario is that very shortly after restrictions are lifted and agents get back into full swing and have had some time to do some physical viewings and valuations of properties, that we'll see a pretty high influx of new properties coming to market. So, and this is actually true both in rentals and in sales. So a lot of people have had to hold fire during the lockdown, so it's very likely that a lot of these will sort of come onto market pretty much almost at once in the weeks or months right after the lockdown is lifted. Which is a good thing because we're also expecting to see a pretty high increase in demand, but we can get to that a little bit later if you'd like.
Okay, perfect. Do you think that's going to have an impact in prices?
Well, naturally, it normally would, but I guess as I mentioned, demand. Yes, there will be an influx of new properties coming to market, but then there will also be a lot of people who would be eagerly waiting, counting the days to be able to get on with their moves. So the demand is going to increase as well. Whether the demand is going to increase proportionally to the supply remains to be seen. It may actually end up being sort of proportional, so that there won't be too much change in the actual pricing of new properties coming to market. I mean, so far, what we can see is very little difference in price. We've we've seen about a 1% drop in price of compared to the same period last year. So far, it's still very early to know whether there will be any significant or long-term impact on new properties coming to market. But I suspect, and from what we can see so far, that the prices will remain fairly stable as long as the demand and the supply are increased proportionally.
Okay, thank you. So I guess that covers off a lot of the questions, broadly speaking, that we've had about the kind of pre-tenancy market stuff that we've had come in. Lots and lots and lots of questions have come in about the mid-tenancy phase. So people that are they're currently tenants, and there's been a change in their situation. So either they're coming to the end of their tenancy agreement, or indeed they're being asked to leave. So if it's okay, we're going to jump into those. And my first question is for you, David. So lots of different scenarios. categorized in my landlord wants me out. They've either served me notice before lockdown or they've served me notice during lockdown. Ultimately, can they make me leave?
So the simple answer to that one is no, they can't. There have been one law change, one procedure change. Both of them happened within 24 hours of each other. So 26th of March, the government passed the Coronavirus Act, which, amongst other things, it created the lockdown and the restriction on movements and the ban on evictions. So effectively, what has happened is that you cannot now be evicted for at least 3 months. So under normal circumstances, depending on what type of notice your landlord gives you, they have between 14 days and 2 months notice that you have to leave before they begin court proceedings. Now, it doesn't matter what type of tenancy you're on, what type of notice is served by your landlord, or for whatever reason it is served, all of those notice periods are now extended for 3 months. So if your landlord serves you notice at this moment in time, they have to give you at least 3 months notice before they can begin the eviction proceedings. Now that currently extends up to the 30th of September. So any notice served between today, well, between 26th of March actually, and the 30th of September, it has to be at least 3 months notice. Now that deals with people who are being served notice. What happens if you've already been served notice before the 26th of March?
Yeah.
Now in those situations, that's where the second change came in, and that happened 24 hours after the first one. So on the 27th of March, the Master of the Rolls, one of the senior judges in England, suspended all possession claims for 90 days. So if you had already had your notice served and that you were going through the court proceedings and the court procedures, they were all put on hold for 90 days. So whether you were just in the first stages awaiting your first hearing, or whether you were in the final stages awaiting the final possession order, everything is on hold for 90 days. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean just stop paying rent. In fact, it means the exact opposite. Whilst the government has effectively stopped people being thrown out of properties, it doesn't mean that you can just sit there not paying rent. You do have to keep paying your rent during this period. And we've had this concept of a mortgage holiday for both owner-occupiers and buy-to-let landlords. And it's important to remember, a holiday doesn't mean you don't have to pay during that period. It's still building up in the background. So the landlord's interest is still building up on their mortgage, for example. And therefore, a rent holiday doesn't mean that the rent would go away. It just means it's building in the background, so that if you get you want a 3 month rent holiday, you're still going to have to pay that 3 months rent when you come out the other end. It doesn't mean that it will go away. So do remember that you do have to keep paying the rent, and if you don't pay the rent, your landlord will be able to get a money order through the courts against you, a county court judgment that will have massive negative connotations going forward. It will make it more difficult to get car loans, regular loans, credit cards. For people that are looking for a mortgage in the near future, it will significantly damage your ability to get a mortgage because it will tank your credit rating. So I would say that whilst we are going through this period, and I'm sure Tom's going to talk about if people get into financial difficulty, but certainly from Property Mark's point of view, what we're trying to do is make sure that if you have fallen on hard times as a result of coronavirus, that government safety net is there. And where we are finding types of people that are falling through the current cracks in the systems that have been put together, we are asking the government to catch those people as well. So if you are having difficulty, let us know. And if it is a new class of people that we haven't spoken to the government about yet, I can assure you we will advocate on your behalf to make sure that there is a financial safety net there for you.
Thanks, David. And so, Tom, I guess you're speaking to both tenants and landlords, and you're seeing this on both sides. So to touch up, to pick up from where David kind of left off, and people who are worried about paying their rent, people that are starting to feel the pinch of maybe they're on furlough, maybe there's other financial implications of the current situation. What options are out there for people that might be worried about paying rent?
Well, I think probably two things are really important here. The first instance is that people really need to make sure that they understand what they are entitled to, what support exists for them, what is actually out there. You know, we've spoken to a few people who have just simply not been aware of what provisions are actually in place for them. And so, you know, there's lots of good resources available online. The government website is a good place to start to find out, you know, what you're actually entitled to. Then when it comes, I suppose, to thinking about rent, if people are in a difficult or prospect of facing difficulties, then we would absolutely encourage anyone who's in that position to talk to their landlord or letting agent, and do so as soon as possible. You know, the sooner a discussion can be had and the full facts of the situation be understood, the sooner good quality decision making can be, you know, put in place, and support can be put in place to alleviate difficulty for tenants. As David said, one of the things that that landlords, not necessarily just landlords, but homeowners can access are mortgage deferments, and often these are then reciprocated and passed on to tenants. Again, as David said, this is a case. This is where an amount of the rent is then deferred for a future point, and the government are urging landlords and letting agents or landlords very much to then work with tenants to ensure that an affordable payment plan is put in place to pay back any arrears that might accrue during that time. So the other thing, I suppose, to you know, worth remembering is just that if people are in a position to pay, to do that, to continue to pay and not allow arrears to build up and for a future time, especially if the future still looks, you know, perhaps slightly uncertain for people.
So I had a question about from what I understand, and the recommendation that or the guidelines from the government, they listed a few suggestions. I mean, the first one, like Tom pointed out, is that as early as possible to get a hold of your lettings agent or your landlord and try to work something out if you feel that you're going to struggle to pay the rent. But apart from payment deferrals or rent deferrals, what are some other options or some suggestions that tenants could put forward apart from a deferral sort of scheme? Are there any other options?
Sorry, David, go on, you jump in.
So I think, one, it is about knowing what is available. So people on furlough, for example, are still getting 80% of their normal take-home pay. Therefore, most should still be able to afford their rents. But it is, have that conversation with your landlord. I'm only getting 80% of my take-home pay at the moment. Would you be willing to come to some sort of agreement? And I will give you the other 20% when we go back to normal, just as Tom said. It's also making sure that there is a sort of, they are aware of the financial support that is available to them. So universal credit, which is the government's new benefits system, is being remarkably generous at the moment. They have increased the amount of money available for the housing element, the housing benefit part of universal credit. They have increased the basic universal credit allowance so that it is more affordable for people to actually be able to pay their rent. One of the things we're asking the government as well is to scrap the 5-week wait and to pay immediately. I know a lot of other bodies are arguing exactly the same. And in fact, I think there was about 20 different organisations that last Thursday sent a joint letter into the Chancellor for this exact purpose of our argument has been keep the rent flowing. And if people are struggling, that is where the government needs to step in these unprecedented times. The whole market will continue working if the government is helping tenants pay their rent. It means for you guys as tenants, you're still getting your rents paid, you're not building up arrears, you're not building up financial debt and financial problems for yourselves later in life and when we come out of lockdown. So it is making sure that what is available, that you understand what you can get from the government, because they are literally giving out hundreds of billions of pounds. Make sure you get what you need.
So getting in touch perhaps with a local citizens advice would probably be highly recommended if someone is up against some hard times.
Yep, citizens advice is a great one. Or your local council. So your local council does have, well, across the 353, I think, local authorities in the country, they are currently sharing a £500 million pot of what is known as discretionary housing payment, i.e. where what is coming in isn't quite enough to pay the rent. So for example, you might be able to get that 20% from your furlough to your normal off your local authority. So do speak to the housing departments in your local authorities. The other great place is the Money Advice Trust, Money Advice Service, the government's free debt advice line, and of course the Department for Work and Pensions itself. Type in universal credit into Google, you'll be able to get a load of really useful information off gov.uk and go through your application. It's an entirely online application, so you could actually apply direct via the universal credit links on gov.uk.
Okay.
Jason, I'm not sure we can hear you.
Perfect. There we are. So thank you very much for your answers there. So we've quite extensively covered off the affordability side of things. We kicked this session off or this section off with tenants that have been served notice or being asked to leave. On the flip side of that, Tom, there are people on the line today that are in current contracts which are due to end in the foreseeable future, which is going to be in lockdown. What advice have you got for those on the line?
Yeah, I mean, if people are in existing contracts that are coming to an end, assuming this is coming to the end of a fixed term, it would be to stay put and talk to your landlord or letting agent and just see what can be agreed in terms of a temporary extension. It can be done either through creation of a new fixed term, or it could be done allowing the tenancy to become periodic and roll on a month-by-month basis. But I would think almost certainly that for most landlords, it's not going to be particularly suitable. Actually, tenants moving out if they're then struggling or not able to find new tenants anyway. So I would rather suspect that a situation where someone's tenancy is coming to an end, it won't actually necessarily serve either party to just allow that contract to come to an end and force somebody to be in a position where they're having to move out. So there's usually, I would imagine, there will be common ground that can be sought to arrange, temporary extensions on contracts and things like that.
Perfect. And for those, we've had a few questions come in around tenancies that are going to come to an end mid lockdown, where they've had a change in circumstances. So they've either been in accommodation where there's multiple occupants in the house. Some of them are no longer going to renew, and they're being told that they'll be liable for the whole property. Is there any advice for anyone that might be experiencing a sudden change in circumstance in lockdown?
So I think that's kind of a question of law. So yep. I think you're talking here, Jason, about sort of shared student houses where you rent one house with multiple people and you're all on one tenancy agreement. That is the joint and several, and therefore everybody is effectively liable for all parts of the rent. So I think it's one of those situations where discuss the situation with your landlord or your letting agent to see what sort of agreement you can come to. What I would say for people whose tenancies are coming to an end during this period, Tom was just talking about what's known as a periodic contract. You don't need to worry, what am I going to do the day after my fixed term comes to an end? The Housing Act 1988, the piece of legislation that governs the duration of tenancies and tenancy contracts, actually creates provisions for what happens in that situation. So don't worry if you can't get a new fixed term contract signed. The sort of extension that Tom's talking about is perfectly lawful. So what happens is you get to the end of that contract. On the next day, if you're still in occupation of the property, then it becomes what is known as a periodic contract, and it rolls month by month by month. So on day one of, let's say you had a 12-month contract of month 13, that becomes a new contract for another month. And then if we're still in lockdown in a month's time, month 14, that becomes the first day of a new contract for month 14. And it rolls month by month by month by month until either you leave or you sign a new tenancy agreement. So don't worry if you get to the end of that point. On the first day of month 13, all the tenancy agreements, all of that still stands. So you still need to pay your rent at the level that you're already paying it. It just continues on lawfully for another month and thereafter month by month. So don't worry about what am I going to do? Am I going to lose my house? The answer is no, you're not. All your terms and conditions still apply. You just keep paying your rent on a monthly basis until we get out of this situation. You can sign a new tenancy agreement if you want to.
David, just a question on that. The entering a periodic agreement, does this have to be a mutual agreement between the tenant and the landlord? And what would happen, hopefully it doesn't happen very often, but what would happen if the landlord didn't want to enter into that agreement and wanted or needed the property back?
So actually, it happens automatically. There are two different types of periodic agreement, and the type you've got will depend on the contract that you signed when you first moved in. So if your contract says, what's the date today? About the 14th, I think.
14th, yeah.
So say it said from the 14th of April 2019 to the 13th of April 2020, and then monthly thereafter. That's called a contractual periodic tenancy, and it just means that everything stays exactly the same. The tenancy continues as normal on a month-by-month basis. If you haven't got that, and it just says from X date to Y date, what happens on the following day is what is known as a statutory periodic tenancy. It's where the law has already caught this eventuality, and it will just roll on to a statutory periodic automatically, unless there is an agreement between the two parties beforehand. So it happens completely automatically on exactly the same terms. If the landlord wants the property back, that is where they've got to either come to an agreement with you as the tenant, or they've got to go through the court process, which of course at the moment they can't. There is really no point at this moment in a landlord serving you any sort of notice because they can't actually act on it. So it is much better to come to an agreement between the two to work out how to resolve it on a temporary basis, just like Tom was saying, until we get out of lockdown, and then we can get everything sorted. If you want to move on, this is a great time to find your ideal property, to get in touch with the agent, do the virtual viewing, get all the paperwork sorted, and particularly, as Tom noted, you can do the right to rent check at the moment over the internet. You will have to do the physical check once we come out of lockdown, but the government have realised that they had a piece of legislation that forced people of two different households into close proximity. And it took us a while, but they did finally appreciate that and they relaxed the law, just as Tom's been saying. So I think it's one of those that stay in the property as much as possible, come to an agreement with your landlord, and then once we're all over, then it's time to move. And if you do want to move, get it all sorted whilst we're in lockdown.
Jason, I don't think we can hear you.
Again, I'm really sorry about that. There we are, we're back. So we're unfortunately running out of time in today's session. We've covered a lot of ground. We've answered hopefully quite a few of the questions in those broad buckets. So I'm going to move on to the final section of today, where we're going to look at some of the new tenancy and end of tenancy questions that have come through. Tom, this first one I'm going to give to you, if that's okay. Whilst there are probably numerous scenarios for this, we paid a holding deposit If the move does not go ahead, do we get our deposit back?
So yeah, I mean, the if tenants aren't going to go ahead with a move, well, I'm not going to go ahead with a move, and by mutual agreement, that's not going to go ahead, then the tenants would likely expect that to be refunded. I suppose, yeah, I think yeah, broadly that's my position on that. That's what I'd expect. So.
And is that broadly across? I mean, maybe one more for you, David. Is that going to be the view for all letting agents, or is that going to be depending on who you deal with and kind of what their stance is?
I think it's going to depend a little bit on who you deal with. So what the law says is if the tenant pulls out, they forfeit their holding deposit. If we just hit pause, and I will be moving when we come out of lockdown, then it's probably right to keep hold of that holding deposit, go through all the full process. If the landlord pulls out, then they have to give it you back. But if you as the tenant are the one that pulls out, then you are technically under the Tenant Fees Act from last year forfeiting your holding deposit. Now it's kind of the reasoning behind why you're pulling out. It's why hit pause, don't hit cancel is the best idea, because then everything's sorted, ready to move until we come out of lockdown and then actually move. But some agents, like Tom, will refund it. Others will adhere to the strict letter of the law that says they don't need to refund it. So it's probably a good idea to have that sort of conversation. But why would you want to? If you've already selected your property that you want to move into, just hit pause.
Yeah, you've done the hard work. And if you are concerned, talk to your letting agent. I think it's the underlining piece of advice that we're hearing today. Going to ask the last couple of questions. So I've already paid rent. I've paid all my fees on my new place. The flat is empty and it's just down the road. Can I move, and can I use a removals company? So I'll leave that to whoever wants to jump in first.
So I think it's slightly different if the property is empty, but you shouldn't be moving unless it's absolutely essential. And because you want to, there's a difference between want and need. So if you don't need to, I would suggest stay put. I do know that the British Association of Removals have issued guidance to all of their members to say don't do anything. If you've got bookings, suspend the bookings until we're out of lockdown. Therefore, I think you will struggle, and certainly something that I've heard anecdotally from across the country is that trying to find a removals company at this moment in time is all but impossible, because they can't do the social distancing. You can't be 2 meters apart when you're carrying a chest of drawers. So they can't comply with the social distancing requirement. Therefore, they have had to shut down. And therefore, I think you will find it very difficult to find a removal company if you do want to move. But again, I would suggest stay put. If you've got everything signed, you've sorted out all your fees, all your deposits and rent in advance, you're going to be moving in. Just wait till the end and you wait till lockdown, stay where you are, pay rent where you are, and then you've got your nice new property to move into in a few weeks' time.
Perfect, thank you. So on the subject of services, there was a question there around removals companies. Tom, are there still people out there that are going to do professional cleaning for you during a lockdown period? If homes are left and if they are left empty, is there anyone that can go in there and clean that professionally for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably, again, something which you'll find varies depending on different circumstances and things like that. Cleaners generally, I think, are still cleaning hospitals and doing those sorts of allowing essential services to be maintained. So certainly there will be, I know there are some cleaning companies that are still going out there and cleaning properties and various bits and pieces like that. And I think, again, the key thing is where it's an essential move, I think those sorts of things can be facilitated, assuming that people are being, very careful to follow all of the guidelines and Public Health England guidance about, ensuring that social contact is an absolute minimum or not at all. So I think, that people will find that 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 you can find cleaners, but I think at the same time, like David said, with the removal companies, I think anecdotally we've found that there are just differing responses as people as different companies make decisions to respond differently.
Perfect, thank you. So the last question of today's talk is the one that has been asked the most, and it's going to be the one that's probably impossible to answer. David, when will I be able to move?
I don't know is the honest answer. Something tells me that the Friday after we come out of lockdown is probably going to be one of the busiest Fridays that the lettings industry has ever seen, with thousands, tens of thousands of people moving across the country. When that Friday is coming, I don't know. All I can say is like everybody, we're expecting the lockdown to be extended for at least another 2 weeks. It's probably going to be extended longer than that. All I can say is, we've got to stay at home. I know it's difficult. I'm cooped up in a 700 square foot flat in London and have been for over 3 weeks, just like everybody else. We've just got to stay put, stay healthy until we can get out the other end. Once we are out the other end, our lives can go back to normal. But whilst we are in this situation, people are dying every day. Therefore, we do have to do as much as we possibly can ourselves to try and stop it. For tenants, this probably won't mean a great deal, but it was supposed to be our big annual conference just a couple of weeks ago. I know probably everybody else on this was going to be in attendance at it. It was due to be at the Excel, and instead of celebrating our 25th anniversary at the Excel Centre, that was the day it was being turned into the Nightingale Hospital. So instead of a big extravaganza, it was being turned into a field hospital for the biggest pandemic we've seen in over 100 years. So I think it's everybody just doing their bit to get through this situation. The agents, landlords will do what they can to help their tenants, to make sure that their tenants are safe and are healthy. I know agents that are driving around the country at the moment, bringing food to sick tenants, getting medication for their tenants. I even know some not far from where I live here who are actually driving NHS workers to work in the morning and back home at night, so they don't have to get on public transport in London. Agents everywhere, landlords everywhere are doing everything they can. It's all about pulling together and getting us through this crisis. And once we are out the other end, we can go back to normal. We can move house as we so choose. The removals will be back up and working. All the legal requirements will get sorted. So it's just stay put for the time being, stay healthy. And once we're out the other end, we will just go back to normal.
Yeah.
Oh, Jason, you've switched yourself off again.
Every time. So, Tom, I was saying, just before we wrap up today, any kind of final thoughts on or piece of advice for any tenants that might still be worried out there right now?
I suppose for people who are still, wanting to move, the advice from us is, turn your search into research. There's loads of great tools, and Rightmove have got loads of useful things on their website. You can customize your search. You can have a think about exactly where you want to live. It's surprising how many people contact us without really knowing exactly where they want to move to, or how many bedrooms they even need. So now is the time for tenants to really consider what's my next move going to look like, what's really important to me, where do I want to look, what sort of prices am I willing to or able to pay, and things like that. And obviously for tenants who are in their current rental properties, follow all the government guidelines, stay safe, stay at home, and certainly make sure that you seek and access all of the help that is available to you, and do ask questions, visit the government website to ensure that all of that support is given to you.
Perfect, thank you. And Daniel, where can people turn to on Rightmove to find help and advice and support if they are concerned about moving, be it sales or rentals?
Well, we have a whole section on Rightmove available to home movers. If you just search for advice in our blog, we have a whole section specific for advice around home moving or in the coronavirus. We have a number of articles. We have a recording of previous webinar we've done, similar to this one, but on the sales side. So following up on what Tom was just saying, there's plenty of research that can be done on Rightmove, and my last bit of advice to everyone is exactly the same as what the other two have said. So I won't repeat it, but just stay safe and stay home, and let's hold on for as long as we can to make this work for everybody. And I'm sure that in not too long, this will just be a distant memory. We'll have lots of stories to tell our grandchildren.
Perfect. Well, thank you, David, Tom, and Daniel. So as they've all said, stay home, stay safe, stay informed. We have recorded today's sessions. We'll send the recording out to everyone that registered for today and took part. Again, you'll find the recording of this session and all of the other webinars that we've hosted on the Rightmove blog. So just head on to rightmove.co.uk and you won't miss the Corona Centre in there. So thank you very much for everyone who took part in today. Thank you very much to our knowledgeable panelists. Thank you very much to my mute button, which wouldn't stop working. And we'll see you on a webinar soon. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.